Hello, today's session is going to be about conclusions and transitions, two very important parts of any speech. So we'll cover some major elements that you're going to need in any good conclusion, how to develop these elements and how you can actually create them to have a lot of meaning and impact at the end of your speech, and how to write these transition sentences that will carry you from one point of your speech to the rest. So conclusions. You need to signal the end of your speech. It's the number one thing you should do before you get into your conclusion. So this will sometimes happen in the transition, and we'll talk about how to write that final transition here in a minute. But you need to tell the audience something very clear and direct, something like, to conclude, or in summary, or I'd like to leave you with these final thoughts. Basically, a sentence or a statement inside of that transition that tells us that you are concluding the speech. It can be very direct and very first person that way. So you need to provide a summary also in a conclusion. A review of your preview is the best way to remember it. A summary is going to briefly describe what three main points you just spoke about. So if I were to give you a speech about the concept of baking chocolate chip cookies in the oven, and I had talked about mixing your dry ingredients first, then your wet ingredients, and then how to prepare those cookies, that would be basically my review. Today I spoke with you about how to mix those dry ingredients first, the wet ingredients, and then how to prepare and cook those cookies. So it's going to seem a little repetitive. You can change the wording up a little bit, but you essentially need to tell the audience what you just told them. So just like in your introduction, when you have the preview and you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them, you're going to tell them what you just told them in your review at the end of the conclusion. You also need to end with a bang. I put up this fireworks picture because I like to tell my students to think of a grand finale. We don't just hold up a sparkler at the end of a fireworks show. We have a grand finale, which means we're going to light everything on fire and blow everything up that we possibly can. So this is your last chance to make this final impression on your audience. You want to make it grand. You want to make it awesome. You want to make everything you can stand out to them. So you really want to have a dramatic statement, and I like to say you want to end with a bang and not a whimper. So some conclusions, you need to develop these completely. When you have your main points done and you have the research done for your main points, you can go back through and then look and see, how can I summarize these? What is the most important things that I want my audience to know? If they can only remember one or two things, what would it be? Think about those as your conclusion. You can have a dramatic statement at the ending, especially maybe in an informative speech that you have told us about something we didn't know about. You can have some sort of drama to really wrap it up on. In a persuasive speech, you might have a call to action, or you might have a dramatic statement there as well, where you kind of challenge the audience to think or feel differently about the topic. You want to edit these as you're continually working on your speech. Don't be afraid to go back in and say, hey, this would be better for my conclusion, or this would fit better right here, and to really tweak it and work on it as you're working on the speech. Also be creative and really use vivid language. This is kind of true throughout your speech, but it's essentially very much true so in your conclusion, because this is going to be the last words that your audience remember from you. And so you may have only captured so much of their attention, and conclusions tend to capture a lot of attention because audience knows that you're wrapping up. They like a summary, they'll pay attention to that. And so this is your chance to really insert some new knowledge or to persuade, depending on your goal. Rehearse your conclusion using your note cards and your visual aid so that it's very, very smooth for you. You don't want to be stumbling through the very last things you want to say to your audience. So a really seasoned speaker would probably use no note cards at all, but new speakers may need to depend on them to really remind them what to say. But you should still only be glancing down at these while looking at your audience at least 90% of the time. So you really want to focus on, can I make eye contact while stating this summary? Can I make eye contact while showing this last slide? And focus your rehearsal time on keeping that eye contact going with your audience. So transitions, let your audience know that you're moving from one part of the speech to another. We've spoken about this in class, if you're in class with me. If you're not in class with me, then this might be the first time you've heard of this, except for when we developed our transition from our introduction. But you will essentially have one more transition for every main point that you have. So if you have a speech with 3 main points, you're going to have 4 transitions. A good formula to remember is, now that you know about this, let's talk about that. And so this helps you remember that not only do you need to let the audience know you're going into the next thing, you've got to let them know in that same sentence that you're ending the thing that you're just done with. So if you see, now that you know about this, let's talk about that, the area before the comma is all about the past. This is what I just spoke of in main point 1. Now I'm going to speak about this in main point 2. When you get done with main point 2, you'll do the same thing by saying, now I've spoken about this in main point 2, and I'll speak about this in main point 3. It needs to be a complete bridge. I like to tell my students that you drop people off in the murky waters of misunderstanding if you don't have a complete bridge here. If for any reason they have drifted off and their attention span isn't there, then this is your chance to regain their attention. If they've drifted off and you simply introduce a new topic and they don't catch that, they could very easily think that the information you share with them under main point 2 relates to main point 1, and that can be very confusing. When an audience member gets confused, they don't struggle to stay in sync with you. They tune you out. So then you're not accomplishing your speech goal if you are unclear in any way. So these transitions really, really help you. You want to write these out fully as full, complete sentences. And you can actually write them as soon as you're done with your main points. Your internal transitions between your main points should write themselves. So that if I'm talking about cookies, let's say, and I was talking about peanut butter cookies and chocolate chip cookies and oatmeal raisin, I could tell you that now you know about peanut butter cookies and the proper temperature for cooking those. Let's take a look at their friends, the chocolate chip cookie. Don't be afraid to use puns or kind of silly language here. As long as it's appropriate and it makes sense, your audience will like it. Just make sure that you kind of keep the same consistency. You don't want to use a very simple, direct formula and then have a pun just out of nowhere. So if you're going to use puns, kind of keep those consistent throughout the transitions. An easy one to think about is if you're giving a speech about cars. You could say, let's motor into the first main point, or let's ignite our engines, or rev up our engines. Let's speed up to main point 2, that sort of thing. But don't forget that it must be a complete bridge. So even if you use those puns, remember that you need to reference what you just ended and what you're starting in your speech. So in summary, conclusions have that ability to leave that final impression on your audience, and so this is your last chance to really drive home a point or to reiterate something that you brought up in your main points, or your last chance to really persuade the audience if that's your goal for your speech. You should not include any new information in a conclusion, so any source data should probably be used, or most source data, should be used in your main points, especially if it's testimony or statistical data or examples or stories, those sorts of things. Those are normally going to be used to develop your main points. Occasionally, you might want to end with a piece of source data, so it's only on occasion. If it's a statistic you really want us to remember, maybe 1 in 8 Americans will get breast cancer, something along those lines, and you remind us that we could be the 1 in 8, or someone we love could be the 1 in 8, then that's a time you might use source data. Other than that, you'll probably have a summary and a dramatic statement or an ending thought that you'd like to leave the audience with. For more information, you can contact me, and my email is provided for you there. You can also contact Amber Chima, and her email is also provided. Thank you very much, and have a great day.